managing cash flow. Consider for a moment which is the most important, cash flow or profit. Or ask yourself a question, what happens if you don't pay your gas bill? There is an old saying, in fact 2 old sayings, that cash flow is king and that profit is sanity and turnover is vanity. And there's good reason for such sayings. You cannot repay your bills with profit. Clearly, cash is exceedingly important to most small businesses. Cash flow is one of the key concerns for most businesses. Good cash flow management can be a major contributor to success, and so accurate forecasting is really essential. As well as covering day-to-day costs, your business will need some reserves to meet unexpected expenses or temporary shortfalls in income. The key elements of maintaining a good cash flow are managing the ins and outs. Know when you are expected to pay on time. Be clear with those you extend credit to regarding your terms and protect your credit rating. Managing your creditors and debtors. You need to achieve certainty. You need to know you're going to be paid. Take a close look at your debtors, who they are. How much credit can you extend? How long do you allow them to pay? Make it easy for them to pay. Set your terms out in writing. Negotiate longer terms with your creditors than your debtors. Manage over-reliance on a small set of customers. Businesses that rely on 1 or 2 customers or 1 or 2 products have an increased exposure. So, for example, if 2 customers represent 80% of your turnover, clearly that's a much greater business risk than if you have 100 customers all with similar amounts of exposure. Do know your customer. Check their status and accounts at Companies House. Consider checking their credit status by contacting credit reference agencies and checking bank and trade references. Set clear limits to limit potential for loss. And consider other forms of protection such as credit insurance, invoice financing, or discount. How the cash flow cycle works. The slide in front of you is illustrative of a typical trade cycle. If we begin with raw materials, we can see how raw materials translate to work in progress, and work in progress translates to finished goods. And then when we have finished goods, we'll sell them into the marketplace. That may create trade debtors. The trade debtors, when we receive payment, are turned into cash. And then we may pay wages and overheads, or indeed you may obviously buy further raw materials, creating trade creditors. So this is a very typical cycle of cash flow. The thing to emphasize, and it fits with our previous discussion around cash flow and cash flow forecasts, is any changes within this cash flow cycle can have a material effect on your overall cash flow forecast. So, for example, if a trade creditor is changing their terms of trade and requesting money more quickly than they have in the past, this will have a negative effect on your cash flow. By contrast, if you're able to obtain a longer credit line from trade creditors, the cash flow would be improved. Raw materials and work in progress. The more raw materials purchased, the longer work in progress takes, then more cash is tied up within the business. Finished goods can be related to stock. Again, the stock has a value, but until the stock is sold, it doesn't generate cash. So a requirement to hold more stock, perhaps to fund growing business, will indicate a greater demand on your cash flow. And trade debtors, clearly sales made for cash are very positive for cash flow, but if you're having to provide 30, 40, 60, 80 days credit and therefore creating debtors, clearly the money that is owed to those debtors doesn't help you pay wages and overheads. So the moral of the story is that it's very important to sort of understand how the cash is moving around the cash flow cycle and to keep a very close eye on it and to understand your own cash position. If I can take you back to the credit assessment and banks' behavioural assessments, you'll remember that I mentioned the behaviour was an important determinant of the likelihood of receiving finance. And sometimes businesses who are not close to their cash flow cycle can not appreciate the negative impact that certain changes can have. So if the cash flow position is worsening, perhaps they can get into a situation where they don't have an open dialogue with their bank, don't request finance at the right time, but they can issue checks when they don't have funds available, or they may do some other behavioural thing which can have an adverse impact on the current account. So the message I would give you is to keep on top of the cash flow, identify when you have cash flow issues that are through doing cash flow forecasts, and have early conversations with the bank, because if you do so when you have a good credit history, you have a much better chance of obtaining the finance that you require. So let's have a quick look at an example of cash flow finance. The slide in front of you, of course, is blank, but has been drawn up on the basis that our mini cash flow will run from January through to May, and we've covered a few typical costs such as capital injected, overheads, premises, and so on. So let's assume this is a startup business that has an initial capital injected of £50. So £50 goes into the cash flow forecast. We've chosen the colour green here, where green is an inflow, and as we build up the slides, red will indicate an outflow. So in January we had a capital injection of £50, but we also needed to buy some raw materials for £20, pay some sales staff £5, some premises costs of £6. So by the end of January we had a net positive cash flow of £19. In February we haven't been able to achieve any sales, but we have had some additional costs, and these have been direct costs of £50, marketing costs of £5. We're continuing to pay our sales staff £5, and our premises costs have gone up slightly to £8. The net effect of all this is now a negative cash flow of £49. In March, we have a broadly similar picture, with 50 in direct costs, 5 for marketing, 5 for sales staff, 8 for premises, but an additional £5 in this particular month for bank charges and interest. So our net negative cash flow now is £122. As we move into April, again we have some similar costs to those we've seen before, but in this month it's £5 for marketing, £5 for sales staff, 6 for premises, and 8 for bank charges and interest. Our cumulative cash flow is now minus £146. And finally we move into the month of May, where again we're seeing a repeat of some of the costs we've had in previous months. That's the £5 for marketing, £5 for sales staff, £6 for premises, and £8 for bank charges. But in May, we're now starting to see sales income, which we've put in as £190, giving us now a positive cash flow of £20. So in this particular example, a business approaching the bank would be looking to request a minimum overdraft facility of £146 and probably would ask for, say, £150 to allow some degree of flexibility.